So as I said, inside these houses, generally the walls are covered in murals, because why not beautify the space that you're going to live in all the time? And there are 4 styles of wall painting that we refer to as first, second, third, and fourth style, because as art historians, we're particularly creative people. And all of these are frescoes. So these are painting in wet plaster. It's a complex technique that creates a very permanent painting, which is why these have survived, not only being hit by the ash and the heat of it, but then being buried for a couple of thousand years. So, we start out with first style, and most of these houses are concrete. Or they're stone with plaster applied over the top. Consequently, the walls are really, really dull. And what better way to keep up with the Joneses than painting it to make it look like it's marble or some other very expensive stone, which is the basis of first style. So first style, they will imprint in the wall these blocks and then come in later and paint them in as different kinds of stone, basically showing off how much money you have. And if it's done well, it's very difficult to tell that you're actually looking at a painting. Of course, if it's not done well, it's really, really obvious, but we won't get into that. And this style is influenced by the Greeks, who used this beginning in the classical period and then through the Greek Hellenistic. And that's because they have different construction methods as they move Greek culture further to the east, and they see the perceived opulence of the Persian Empire and those eastern territories during the Hellenistic period. Then we have the second style, and this is usually used in the garden along the back wall to make it look like there's an extension on that back wall, to make it look like there's more land there than we would think. And frequently, these are going to be gardenscapes. They're probably influenced by the Greeks, and the idea was to make the wall seem to dissolve away, creating this imaginary 3-dimensional world with a lush gardenscape. And what's really interesting here is we tend to think of perspective as something that is developed during the Renaissance, but in fact it's not. Because we see 2 different forms of perspective. In the background here, we see what's known as atmospheric perspective. So in other words, things that are further back will have less detail, less contrasting color, usually a lighter color. And then as they move forward, they become more detailed and more colored. So you can see as we move back, things get very hazy. As you move forward, you get a lot of detail. The second form that we see is scientific or linear perspective. Look at this wall around the tree, and you'll notice that it's in proper perspective as it falls back, and we can even follow it and find a vanishing point right about there, which should also hold true on this side, which it more or less does. And that is scientific perspective. That's what we use indoors or in cityscapes where we have built-up environments. So this idea of perspective is actually an old one that the Greeks, more than likely, and the Romans most definitely, are making use of. So let's look at third style. Now, third style looks a lot like an old-fashioned bank vault. What we see is delicate linear work. All of these columns that you see, this is all painted in. It's creating the illusion that there's a niche that's been created in the wall. Of course, the wall is in fact flat. And what we see is these tiny floating scenes that are not an extension of space. They're more like a tiny little framed piece of art. It's just the style of the time. And remember, we're looking at a very specific time. We're looking at a period of time from maybe 50 BCE until 79 AD. So it's like we're taking a snapshot of about 100 years of Roman murals. And then we have fourth style. And the fourth style is a mix of all of the other 3. We see a lot of color. We see a very eclectic form. And we see all of the initial forms. So if we look at this room, for example, we have first style right here, painting in the different kinds of stone. We see second style in many of these windows. Now, they're not gardenscapes, but we're definitely seeing an outdoor environment. Look at the windows up above as well. And then we see third style right here with our tiny little image floating in the middle of this larger linear frame. And we see in this case a mythological scene where we have gods up above looking down into the household, hopefully bringing good fortune upon the household. As we look out these windows, it's as if we're looking out at an extension of the house, as if this almost M.C. Escher-ish temple is built onto the side of it, and the gods are specifically looking down on the events that happen within the house. And it's very similar to later ideas that we'll see in the Sistine Chapel and elsewhere, especially during the Renaissance, where we'll again get this sense of architecture appearing in painting. And by the way, you'll notice the linear perspective is very good, but also you'll notice as these elements drop back, they're getting lighter and they have less contrast. So they're mixing linear and atmospheric perspective beautifully to create a really incredible image through these windows.